Hashtag why expensive art looks more important. Imagine walking into a gallery and seeing two paintings hanging side by side. You know nothing about either artist. You look at the first painting. Perhaps you like it. Then you look at the second. Maybe you don't understand it at all. Now someone tells you that the first painting is worth $5,000. The second one recently sold for $5 million. Would you look at them differently? Most of us would say no. We would like to believe that price doesn't influence us. But human psychology is complicated. The moment we hear that a painting is worth millions, something changes. We become more attentive. We look more carefully. We search for something extraordinary. We assume there must be a reason why someone was willing to pay so much. And suddenly, the painting may begin to look more important. But is it actually more beautiful? That's a very different question. Art and money have always had a complicated relationship. We often talk about art as though it exists outside the commercial world. We imagine the artist alone in the studio, creating something from the heart. But once the artwork enters the marketplace, another world appears. Collectors, dealers, galleries, museums, auction houses, critics, investors, and all of them can influence the perceived value of an artwork. This creates an interesting distinction between artistic value and financial value. They are not necessarily the same thing. A painting can be extremely expensive and leave you emotionally cold. Another painting can be worth very little and stay in your memory for years. So why does price have such power over us? Part of the answer is social proof. When other people value something highly, we tend to assume they know something we don't. If thousands of people admire an artist, we become more willing to believe that the artist must be important. If a museum gives an artist an entire exhibition, we assume the work deserves our attention. If a painting sells for an enormous amount of money, we naturally become curious. The price becomes part of the story, and sometimes the story becomes more powerful than the painting itself. Imagine standing in front of an ordinary-looking canvas. You don't know the artist. You don't know the history. You don't know the price. You might spend 30 seconds looking at it. Then the gallery label tells you that it was painted by an artist who became famous after years of rejection. The painting was once dismissed by critics. Decades later, it became recognized as a masterpiece. Suddenly, you look again. The brushstrokes seem more meaningful. The composition seems more deliberate. The imperfections seem intentional. You begin to see things you didn't see before. Did the painting change? No, but your expectations changed. And expectations are powerful. There is another interesting effect. Sometimes people are afraid to criticize expensive art. Imagine standing beside a painting that has sold for $50 million. You look at it and think, I don't like this. But then you look around. Everyone else appears impressed. You begin to question yourself. Maybe you don't understand it. Maybe you aren't educated enough. Maybe you're missing something. So instead of saying what you really think, you remain quiet. Perhaps you even say, it's fascinating. This is where money can create a kind of psychological authority. The price seems to tell us. Someone important decided this was valuable. Therefore, perhaps I should value it too. But who decides what art is worth? That is one of the most complicated questions in the art world. Sometimes value comes from rarity. Sometimes from historical importance. Sometimes from the artist's reputation. Sometimes from demand. Sometimes from provenance, the history of who owned the artwork. And sometimes, frankly, from fashion. An artist becomes fashionable. Collectors compete. Prices rise. More people become interested. Prices rise even further. And eventually, the artist's market reputation becomes part of the artwork's identity. This doesn't necessarily mean the art is bad. It simply means that art exists within an economic system. And we should be honest about that. But here's where the gallery visitor has an advantage. You don't have to participate in that system. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to agree with the critics. You don't have to admire an artist because the market has decided that the artist is important. You can simply look, and you can ask yourself, what do I actually see? Does this painting move me? Does it make me curious? Does it disturb me? Does it remind me of something? Will I still want to look at it if I didn't know its price? That last question is especially interesting. Imagine that the price label disappeared. Imagine the famous name disappeared. Imagine the crowd disappeared. Imagine that you were completely alone with the artwork. Would you still stop? Would you still look? Would you still care? Because that is where the gallery experience becomes personal. Money can tell us what the market values. Critics can tell us what they think is important. Museums can tell us what belongs in the history of art. But none of them can completely determine what you feel. And perhaps that's one of the great freedoms of looking at art. You can disagree. You can love something everyone else ignores. You can dislike something everyone else worships. You can be fascinated by a painting that isn't considered important. And you can stand in front of a multi-million-dollar masterpiece and feel absolutely nothing. That's okay, because there are really two questions. How much is this painting worth? And how much is this painting worth to me? Those are not the same question. The first belongs to the art market. The second belongs to you. So the next time you enter a gallery and discover that a painting is worth millions of dollars, notice what happens inside your mind. Do you suddenly look harder? Do you search for its greatness? Do you feel that you are supposed to admire it? Or do you simply look at the painting and decide for yourself? Perhaps the most valuable thing you can bring into a gallery isn't money. It's independence. Because the moment you can look at art without being intimidated by its price, its fame, or its reputation,